Today, I'm going to tell you two true stories about caving that went horribly wrong, so terrifying that they'll make you reconsider your next weekend adventure. The first will leave you speechless, a father trapped in an underground labyrinth with no apparent way out. The second? It ends in an even more chilling tragedy. On May 25, 2003, David Moreau, 34, father of three, had planned the perfect adventure for his family. An experienced amateur caver, he had already explored several caves in the area. That day, he wanted to take his wife Sarah and their children, aged 8, 5, and 18 months, to discover the famous Ice Crystal Cave. The night before, David had carefully programmed his GPS with the coordinates he found on a caving forum. He had studied the map, noted the multiple entrances, and the famous ice formation that gave the cave its name. Everything seemed perfect: a short hike from the parking lot, a brief underground exploration, and back home for dinner. Their family minivan bumped along the forest road, climbing toward the mountains. Sarah sat silently in the passenger seat while their three children chattered excitedly in the back. David parked about 200 yards from where his GPS indicated the cave entrance. He unloaded their minimal equipment, strapped the baby carrier onto Sarah's back, and led his family along a barely visible path through the pine forest. They soon came upon a depression in the ground with a dark opening, the entrance to what he believed was the Ice Crystal Cave. As he studied the opening and compared it to his map, uncertainty set in. The map showed several entrances, and he couldn't be sure which one they had found. Nevertheless, the day was perfect, the children were eager, and David felt confident. He adjusted his helmet, turned on his headlamp, and secured his fanny pack containing 2 spare flashlights, extra batteries, and the folded map of the cave. Without thinking, he slipped the car keys into his pocket. David decided to explore alone first, planning to check out the route before bringing his family inside. He wanted to make sure that this passage led to the main chamber with its legendary ice formations. The entrance passage narrowed as David descended, the temperature dropping noticeably with each step. After about 30 meters, he came to what appeared to be a dead end with only a small passageway 45 centimeters high continuing to the right. Unfolding his map in the beam of his headlamp, he studied the layout. The configuration seemed to match a section near the west entrance. If his orientation was correct, he could navigate through this ramp, travel a short distance in the main passage, and come out at the wider entrance with the ice deposit, a perfect loop for the family. David got down on all fours and squeezed through the narrow opening, pushing his banana bag in front of him. Emerging on the other side, he found himself in a wider passageway extending to the left and right. According to his understanding of the map, the main entrance should be on the left. He turned in that direction and advanced confidently, the beam of his headlamp piercing the absolute darkness. Minutes passed as he walked, the passage extending further than anticipated. After a while, he came across a section of rubble, a collapsed ceiling and fallen rocks, that was not marked on his map. Confusion flashed through his mind, but he reasoned that perhaps the map was outdated or simplified. He cautiously made his way through the obstacles, convinced that the main entrance must be just ahead. Finally, David came to what appeared to be a collapsed entrance, completely blocked by earth and debris. No light penetrated the embankment. Standing before this unexpected barrier, a cold sensation spread between his shoulder blades. This didn't match the map at all. Checking his watch, he realized he had been gone much longer than the quick reconnaissance he had promised Sarah. David turned around, retracing his steps through the landslide section. His pace quickened as his concern for his family waiting for him grew. After walking what seemed longer than his journey there, he came to another entrance that appeared to have collapsed. It looked eerily similar to the one he had just left. Disorientation washed over him as he tried to reconcile this impossibility with his mental map. To confirm his suspicion, David bent down and scratched a large X in the dirt with his finger. His heart pounding, he turned around and walked in the opposite direction, counting his steps. About 400 steps later, his headlamp illuminated the same X marked in the dirt. A wave of dizziness threatened to overwhelm him as the reality of his situation crystallized. He was trapped in a circular passage with no obvious way out. The ramp had to be there somewhere. It couldn't have just disappeared. David forced himself to calm his racing heart and think rationally. He decided to search systematically along the outer wall of the loop, running his hand along the cold rock surface as he walked. The awareness of time passing intensified his anxiety. He had been underground for over an hour now. Sarah must be panicking. The weight of the car keys in his pocket suddenly felt like an anchor. His family was effectively stranded at the start of the trail with no transportation, no way to seek help without abandoning the children or forcing them on a long walk. His methodical search of the outer wall revealed nothing. No handrail, no escape route. David completed another circuit, this time examining the inner wall with equal attention. Still nothing. The beam from his headlamp seemed to be dimming, even though he knew he had fresh batteries. Darkness was closing in, almost tangible in its oppressiveness. Trying to keep his search organized, David tore small pieces from his cave map and placed them at distinctive landmarks along the loop: rock piles, unusual formations, the collapsed entrance. After his third complete circuit, finding himself once again at his starting point with no sign of the ramp, the first tentacles of genuine panic took root in his chest. His breathing became shallow and rapid, sweat dampening his shirt despite the cold of the cave. 5 hours had passed. 5 hours of circling around in the darkness, each circuit feeding his growing disorientation. David no longer knew exactly what he was looking for. The tiny opening had become mythical in his mind. A portal that might never have existed. Every rock, every contour of the wall began to look the same. Features blurred together in the narrow cone of his headlamp. Exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. David sat down heavily on a rock, his mind replaying the moment he had entered the ramp. Had he really turned left after exiting, or right? His certainty wavered. Perhaps his basic assumptions were wrong. Another hour passed as David made additional circuits, each more desperate than the last. The cave seemed to change around him. Passages stretched and contracted in his perception. The absolute darkness beyond the beam of his light seemed alive, watching, waiting for his light to falter. His throat tightened with thirst. The silence weighed against his eardrums, broken only by his footsteps and his increasingly irregular breathing. A new terrible thought emerged, that this was no ordinary cave. Stories of cavers lost forever in mountain tunnels came back to him. David's legs trembled as he stood up for another circuit. He had been underground for nearly 6 hours now, walking the loop perhaps a dozen times. He tried to shout, knowing it was futile. The entrance was too far away, the earthen walls too effective at swallowing sound. Suddenly, something inside David snapped. The weight of his situation came crashing down on him all at once. His composure shattered like glass. David fell to his knees, the damp cave floor soaking his pants. His body shook with sobs that tore from deep within his chest. "Please," he begged into the darkness, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need to get out. My family needs me." Then, from some deep reserve, a glimmer of determination lit up. His children were waiting for him. Sarah must be terrified. He was their father, their protector. In desperation, David returned to the collapsed entrance and started again. This time, he stayed close to the ground, examining every inch of wall near floor level. 15 feet from the earthen plug, he stopped. Something about the pattern of shadows seemed different. He crouched lower, directing his beam along the base of the wall. There it was, an opening barely 15 inches high, partially obscured by a protruding rock. Relief washed over him, immediately followed by disbelief at his blindness. The ramp had been there all along, just 15 meters from the collapsed entrance. David realized his critical mistake. Upon entering the cave and exiting the ramp, he had indeed turned left as he remembered, but he had then walked almost the entire loop before encountering the collapsed entrance. Minutes later, he emerged into the golden afternoon light, blinking painfully as his eyes adjusted. The forest seemed impossibly vibrant after the monochrome darkness of the cave. The parking lot was empty. Sarah and the children were gone. Later, he would learn that Sarah, growing increasingly worried, had taken the children and walked to the road, eventually finding a way to a forest ranger station where she had called for help. She had returned with rescue workers just as David emerged from his underground prison, ending his 5-hour ordeal in what would later be called the Minotaur Cave. But that story was nothing compared to what happened in the depths of the Roaring River Cave. On October 14, 2022, an even more terrifying tragedy would unfold beneath the dark waters of the Missouri River, proving once and for all that some places on our planet never forgive even the slightest mistake.